has there been a bigger fall from grace than Leicester City in the Premier League?
Do you know, it's hard to look at it. People were talking about that. I was actually part of an Aston Villa group that, OK, it wasn't the Premier League, but only 4 years previous to that, they'd won the European Cup and we were relegated. So, I mean, people are saying, oh, they won 7 years ago the Premier League. I think the Villa situation was even bigger, and I was a part of that.
That was before the Premier League, wasn't
it?
Same as
before the Premier League.
Same as Blackburn. Don't forget, Blackburn got relegated 5 years later.
You get sucked in, you're in there, and you can't. You think you can affect it, you can't. It's just snowball effect, and it's a slippery slope that you can go on as a football club.
How did it happen, though, to them? Because they've got so much talent in that squad. Did they sleepwalk into it? Was that James Maddison tweet when he sent out after the Southampton game to Rob Tanner, who had suggesting that all the ingredients that were there for relegation, and he said, nonsense, watch the game, report on the facts, play like that, we will be fine, we created enough chances. He was in denial at that point that they were in a relegation fight, but they were. Did they realise it too late?
Personally, I feel that Brendan tried to take on the players. He tried to take on the dressing room. And he didn't have the means. He wasn't supported. He didn't have the money to buy the new players to come to the football club. It's healthy when you allow players to go. There was a group of players that contracts are up now that probably should have been moved on and got money for.
And he wanted to do that, and he told the board he wanted to do that. Why didn't they let him do it?
Well, I think Martin's point is a very good point, because, you know, the fact of the matter is that Brendan Rodgers called it on after the Nottingham Forest FA Cup loss. He called it on. Now, he either should have understood what was happening with his ownership to be able to make those sort of observations, or he should have pared it back and accepted what he's got. And if he accepted what he's got and he didn't want to work with it, he should have walked. Now, I know there's a matter of £8 million that necessarily would have been lost from him if he walks away. But I hold Brendan Rodgers, in part, significantly responsible for the demise of Leicester City.
What about John Rudkin? Because he sacks or agrees that Brendan Rodgers leaves and then doesn't have a plan in place. They play Aston Villa and Bournemouth with two guys that haven't managed a football match before.
But I don't think that's the case.
Plan?
I don't believe that's the case. I believe it's a case of Brendan Rodgers.
Well, you don't believe there was a plan?
I don't believe he sacked him. I believe they sat there with one another, looking one across the table, going, "I don't fancy this anymore." I believe Brendan Rodgers went, "I don't fancy this anymore." So what are you going to do?
But that relationship,
I don't fancy you anymore. You don't fancy it anymore. So let's not fancy it together.
Sam,
we all knew it was coming to an end.
Sam,
right?
lots of questions. Let us speak. So what I think happened was that the plan was to go with the players they had. Okay, let's gamble. They'll keep us in the Premier League because of the quality we have. And the worst possible things happen to them now. They kept the players whose contracts are now up, so they get no money for them. And they've been relegated. So they're now in real trouble because they've got to rebuild completely next year with hardly half the squad going out the door. Really good players.
So
only Maddison. Well, in a way, who would have thought this would have gone wrong? When you looked at the actual quality of the squad, you'd have felt, well, this is, okay, if we're going to take that gamble, this has got to be good enough to stay up. And it wasn't, because they didn't have the players pulling together. Brendan had lost the players. The players were kind of like, basically, when you go into a game, it's not a tap you turn on and off. You have to be totally committed. And nobody wanted to stay. When Wesley Fofana was allowed to leave the football club in the summer, he jumped the queue of the exit door. I've been in a club. When I went to Aston Villa, the players said to me, "What are you doing here? Why did you come here for? We all want to leave." The Steve Hodges, the Paul Elliots said to me, "Oh, what have you come here for?" Now, when you arrive at a football club like that, it's very difficult to get that sort of togetherness that you need.
It's got to be full throttle. The Fofana situation was difficult because the size of the transfer fee dictated some of Leicester's decision-making process, but so did the players' behaviour. Because the player made it very clear he wanted to leave. Now, the fact of the matter is they didn't do enough about it. But again, I go back to the point. If you're gonna call out a dressing room, then you need to be able to have the tools to be able to break it up as you see fit. But then you need to understand that you can do that before you start calling out a dressing room, which is what Rodgers... Now, Rodgers might have been caught in a moment of peak. But when you get to the beginning of the season and you haven't got what you want, rather than start the first 7 games of the season not winning a game because your mindset isn't right and put yourself in a situation that is going to flow through for the rest of the season, look what's happened there. Jamie Vardy was almost like his surrogate son at one point, and something's happened there. Because Jamie Vardy was marginalised for a proportion of a season. People look back on Schmeichel. Schmeichel's form last year wasn't great.
No.
The fact of the year before last, sorry, not this year. So people were actually saying, I think it's run its course. Now they're saying, oh, he was a big voice in the dressing room, and that's what's been lost. Maddison, when Maddison sent his tweet out, wasn't wrong in what he said, because the reporter that had written an article about that was looking at Leicester's form previously. In the game that he was writing on, they had battered the side. Iniacho had missed every single thing that you could possibly give him to score from.
To go back to Schmeichel, was that a message? We know how close he was to the owner. Was that a message from Brendan to say, no, he's going?
But he wasn't close to the owner.
I thought it was like pulling the plug out of the bath.
He was close to the father. And so when you think about Schmeichel's relationship with the father, tragic passing of the father, it was his relationship with him,
to the family.
not the son.
I think he was very close to the family.
And I think you look at Leicester and you say, the disengagement, Leicester's disengagement from the board level has enabled Brendan Rodgers to be disengaged, and subsequently, the most important part of the equation is the players become disengaged.
So
and here you've got what you've got.
When we look at Leicester, we
What are you
admire
pointing at me
because
for?
I have to point at you because you're going to speak before I can get in. So when we look at Leicester, let's look at what we admire about them. They were fifth in the table for two occasions. They won the FA Cup. Those supporters have done things in their lifetime that fans only dream of at other football clubs. But now they should, when they've got it wrong, look at what's going to happen at Brighton. McAllister, Casado are going to be allowed to organically go. It's healthy. Leicester blocked that. They didn't want it to happen. They were guilty of hanging on to their players for too long. And when one player was making enough noise to go, it disrupted the whole group, and it affected that team spirit, that togetherness that they had. And Brendan couldn't get the players back on board.